I am outraged.
Holland.
I know.
Why are you outraged?
No, I said that because that's the thing to be these days. And we're recording this, like 4 weeks before the U.S. presidential election. And outrage is what seems to be happening all across all my social media accounts. It's the thing to be, especially if you're passionate about justice issues or if you want to appear compassionate about something that's in the news and you have a social media presence.
That is very true. And there's a narrative that is fueled by social media, and it is a trend. And that's something that we talk about here at the Afterword table. We've seen people jump to the wrong conclusions, destroy others, all in a bid to look compassionate on our wonderful Facebook. And not just Facebook, but other places too, like Twitter and even Instagram. Dr. Molly Crockett, who's a researcher and professor at Yale, has studied the eruption of outrage in the public square. And she says there is a biological reason for what we're seeing. She also says that a population that's outraged online will likely be ineffective at creating change in the real world.
Dr. Crockett's TED Talk is well worth the time to listen to, and so is our podcast. Tonight, we have two expert guests joining us to talk about moral outrage narratives and social media.
Hi, I'm Holland Webb.
Hi, I'm Amy Boland.
And you're listening to The Afterword, a conversation about the future of words.
So first of all, we have Rob Henderson. He is a PhD student and Gates Cambridge Scholar at the University of Cambridge, studying social psychology. So Rob, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your research.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Holland. It's great to be here. So I've just entered my third year of the PhD program here at Cambridge, where I study social and evolutionary psychology. My current research focuses on primarily on things like moral judgment and how it can be sensitive to external factors, things like contamination concerns, for instance, the looming COVID-19 pandemic, as well as threats to social status and how that can affect moral judgment. And more broadly, I've written about things like cancel culture, moral outrage, and concerns about how social status can affect our thoughts and behavior.
Thank you. We're gonna have to come back to this idea of evolutionary psychology later, because I'm writing notes and I just need that clarified, and maybe some of our listeners will too. But we'll talk about that later. Thank you so much for sharing.
And joining Rob is Dillon Smith, who is the content director for Carey Nieuwhof Communications. Dillon, what keeps you up at night?
Man, we live in this world that is tearing itself apart, especially online. I have friends who are both on the right and the left, if you want to say, and it's just awful to see them go at each other when even 3 years ago they just got along before we were fallen into this world of just anger that we're surrounded by. So that concerns me. But what concerns me more is working for Carey Nieuwhof. One of our things is helping churches, so we're Christians, and that's a big point of passion for me. And the problem is that I'm not seeing Christians be any better than the rest of the world at being outraged with each other, insulting each other, tearing each other down, tearing other people down. That is not how Jesus lived. And if we're going to be like Christ, which is what Christians are supposed to be, we're not hitting the mark. And I know there's a movement of Christians trying to not be that way. And then there's a lot of really well-meaning ones. But man, the actions of probably more than a few are ruining the perception of many. And that concerns me a lot.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And when Amy and I started looking at this topic several months ago, and we started thinking about who we wanted to have on here, and of course, eventually we found you guys, and we're like, this is exactly the kind of pairing we like to have: people who are students of a topic, and the people who practice that topic and who actually communicate that topic using words in the real world. And I've discovered that both of you have really interesting personal stories. Could you just give us the baseball card version of your life, Rob, and then you, Dillon, just so we kind of have a feel for who you are as people?
The baseball card version. Well, okay, so the short version, is, I was born into poverty in Los Angeles to drug addicted mother, and spent a few years living in different foster homes. Later, I was adopted, and then later my adoptive parents divorced. And so, there was some ensuing chaos and some drama. And as a result of this and other things, I just really wasn't a good student. I was always a curious kid and read a lot and just was not in a position, though, for academic work. So after high school, I joined the military. And after a while, I started taking some night classes, took the SAT, and did well enough to go to Yale. And while I was an undergrad at Yale, I was working as a research assistant at a psychology lab, and became interested in the kinds of things that we're talking about today and some other things. And yeah, that sort of led me here to Cambridge.
Wow, thanks. So were you in Dr. Crockett's lab?
I was not in her lab, but I did take a social neuroscience class with her. And she's really, very interesting, amazing thinker.
Wow, that's very cool. Dillon, would you mind sharing the baseball card version of Dillon Smith?
Yeah. Rob, your story of comeback and getting ahead when everything was against you, super impressive. Just want to say that. And so for me, I was born not in LA, but in small town, Nebraska, town of 8,000 people just outside of a major city. And I was born to a family that kind of had it all figured out on the outside. But my dad was heavily addicted to alcohol, really was plagued by some deeper drug addictions as well. And actually ended up passing away when I was 12 in a motorcycle accident. So after that, my life has been found Jesus, and really was brought in by the church and cared about, guided by, shepherded by the church and some older Christians that really took me under their wings. That was outstanding. Got into college, had a pretty good gifting for thinking on a little bit deeper level about the challenges facing the big church. And I had a passion for that. And that's actually through that passion is how I met Carey, and kind of how I've been able to work for him and his organization. And he's a best-selling author and everything. So I've just been able to learn from him for the last couple of years, and it's been outstanding. He's a Canadian, and we disagree on some things politically, but it's been so good to learn from him. So that's kind of the short story, I guess.
I love this. And I think we may have to, Holland, even maybe think about this for next year, but put everybody's little bio on a baseball card with the afterword as promotional, just because it is very, very insightful to be able to sum up your life on a baseball card and to look at that succinctly, and to hear you both pull out some pretty powerful things that impacted who you are today. So really appreciate your vulnerability and sharing of that. Yeah. All right, let's get into this. I feel like I almost need to hear that www ding. I need to hear a bell. Ready? Okay, so we're ready to go. I'm like we need a cage fight or a ref or something, because we're going to get ready to get into some heavy duty topics right now. And Rob, I'm going to start with you first. We need to define some terms, because for a lot of us, this is new, but we're not going to shy away from the new. What is cancel culture?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, the way I've defined cancel culture is essentially refers to either ending or attempting to end someone's career or their social prominence because of some perceived wrongdoing. So just keep it pretty short like that. But there are various examples of this.
Can you give us kind of an example what you mean?
A recent example would be J.K. Rowling, right? I think she got in, I don't know the specifics, but I do know that she said or posted some things that upset the transgender community, because she has her own beliefs about women's rights and feminism, and they have their own views on that. And so there was some back and forth about this. But I think that some members of this community attempted to sort of bring her down to some degree and reduce some of her prominence and her prestige, at least within their community.
Okay, that's a good example. How about moral outrage?
So moral outrage. It's this powerful emotion that we feel when we see someone doing something wrong, or when we believe they've done something wrong. There's some interesting debates about how sincere some of these expressions of moral outrage are. Justin Tosi and some others, they recently wrote a book called Grandstanding, and it's about this idea of moral grandstanding, which is essentially like this calculated expression of outrage in order to boost the speaker's prestige or social status in the eyes of onlookers.
Yeah, I'm writing that down. It sounds like an interesting book. And these little, as you're talking, like I'm kind of like getting this movie in my mind, almost like from the movie National Treasure, and Nicolas Cage walking down the stairs, wrong about this, wrong about that, and you're making this moral outrage about something that, just to get your point across. How about things like woke fishing or clickbait?
Clickbait is, essentially like headlines that are designed to capture our attention using, very provocative language, usually highly emotional. And woke fishing, I think this is a fairly recent phenomenon. I've been reading a little bit about this. Essentially, men are pretending to be progressive when they go out on dates with women in order to be seen as more attractive, holding the right kinds of, the right, in quotes, kinds of beliefs that they believe that women will like, so that they will increase their chances of, success. Which I think the phrase woke fishing is sort of this twist on the idea of catfishing, which was, I don't know if it's still done, but at least, back in the day, there was a show on MTV about this. And people would post fake photos on dating websites to trick people into thinking they were more attractive than they were.
Sometimes there was pedophilia involved in that too. The catfishing. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Wow. Lots of education here, and a couple more. Neuroethics.
Yeah, I'm certainly no expert on neuroethics. To be honest, that class with Molly Crockett, that was the only neuroscience class I ever took. But my understanding of neuroethics is basically the study of the kinds of like ethical issues that arise when we have the ability to use technology to manipulate or influence how the brain responds to different kinds of things, different stimuli, social media, smartphone technologies, all these things, and basically like how these technologies can manipulate us.
Okay. That kind of goes back to our episode on AI, Holland, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to pull the one that you used earlier, evolutionary psychology. Gotta give me a little heads up about what this means.
There are a lot of different perspectives on what this means, but one way of thinking about evolutionary psychology is it's essentially the way that our our perceptions, our senses, our beliefs and behaviors evolved. And even though we live in the modern world, our psychology and the ways that our minds were set up actually arose in a very different kind of social environment, roughly in the Pleistocene about 100,000 years ago. And so the kinds of things that we tend to enjoy doing, or things that we care about, things that we believe, they are all sort of influenced by evolution and things that helped us to survive long ago. Things like the kind of food we enjoy eating. We enjoy really sweet foods. There's a reason for that. These tend to be calorically dense in the ancestral environment where we came from. Why we enjoy, having sex, why we enjoy taking care of our loved ones. So all of these things had an evolutionary payoff in a very different environment. But there's some discussion about this, that behaviors that were advantageous in that environment may actually be detrimental in this one. Simple example is, food. So 100,000 years ago, if you came across, some meat or some honey, you better eat as much as you can because you don't know when you're going to get your next meal. But today we have this abundance of food, And it's very easy to overeat. And it's probably why, something like 60% of Americans are overweight, because, we weren't sort of set up for this kind of landscape, this environment.
I feel educated. How about you, Holland?
I do. I've heard of some of those ideas, like the example that you gave about eating caloric dense food, or other things that help people to survive historically that just don't help today. But I hadn't heard it called evolutionary psychology. And I guess I never thought about the fact that psychology would have to evolve sort of hand in hand with biology in order for us to survive, to adapt and survive. Never sat down and thought about that. But okay, for the topic we're talking about tonight, the first time that I remember something like this getting headlines was in 2013 when Justine Sacco tweeted from the airport, and I think it was Heathrow. She was 30 years old. She had about 400 followers on Twitter. She was the public relations director for a big company out of New York. And she tweeted, "I'm headed to Africa. Hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding. I'm white." Shut down her phone, got on the plane, and started for South Africa, where she was visiting her family. Well, of course, this is, if you've ever made a trip from Europe to anywhere in Africa, it's forever long. And at that time, you couldn't get on the internet from the plane. This tweet goes crazy, right? She finally lands in South Africa, opens up her phone, and finds she's the number one worldwide trend on Twitter. And people have gone completely bananas, calling for her to be fired, calling for her. People were following her around South Africa. There were hotels that wouldn't let her stay there because they were afraid for their safety. Her aunt said, "You've destroyed our family." All kinds of tweets from people who didn't recognize her, calling her terrible names. I mean, clearly she was not really fit for corporate communications work, but there was some concern later, like, was the reaction to this tweet really comparable to what she did? Was it really a measured response? So here's the question I wanted to pose to you, Dillon. Why do we enjoy punishing people so much?
I think back to like the playground in school. Why did the bullies bully who they bullied? It wasn't like because that person that they were bullying was a bad person. I think we as humans just get this natural like satisfaction, would be one word to say, but when we're putting other people down and exalting ourselves above them, there's just this deep innate sense in us that I think does that. And it's terrible, but it is natural human nature. And I hate how it rips people apart. But that definitely happens. And I think now with online, it's a lot easier to pick a fight when you don't actually have a punch that could follow after you say some words to someone. So like, we can't see the whites of other people's eyes. We can't see the look of their face when we're throwing these insults at people. Or in this case where she tweeted and then got on the plane, like she could have had time to delete the tweet. She could have had time to respond. People just don't have to see like someone's response online. So that just amplifies things significantly. Most of the time when we have moral problems like this, like moments where just people are outraged about things, obviously there was something wrong in what she said. Like, that is a terrible thing to say. You can't just generalize an entire content for going to give you, like, that is terrible, awful. I don't know if she needs to be like, people calling for her death about it, or like people banning her from a hotel. Maybe people could label her as dumb. I could go for that. Or maybe she made a dumb moment in a dumb instant, or maybe someone stole her phone and tweeted that. Like, there's a million things that could have happened there. I think the problem is deeper than just, we see other people like doing dumb things. I think the problem of moral outrage and all of that like why we're so aggressive in it, I think it's found within us just as much as it's found outside of us. There's a quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, which is, "If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of humanity and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being." And I think in these moments of moral outrage, I bet that in a different instant, if it were someone else to tweet, that girl who tweeted it would have been outraged about someone saying that at a different point in her life. So I think although we are morally outraged about each other, we're morally outraged about ourselves as well. And maybe it's habits of ourselves or whatever, but I think the problem is just as much within than without. I'd love to hear the evolutionary psychology take on that.
Well, I was just wondering about that. Is there?
Yeah, well, I mean, this isn't necessarily evolutionary psychology, but what you said was interesting at the end there about how Justine Sacco, if she had been an observer and someone else had tweeted that she may have joined that sort of dogpile against that person. I mean, what I find interesting now, I'm seeing people who are reluctant to defend someone because of something like that. So I'll wade into a little bit of provocative territory here, but there was something that happened at Yale. How was it? I don't know when this was, 2-3 years ago or something, but essentially there was a young white student who walked into the common area of one of the residential colleges and saw a young African-American woman sleeping on the sofa and, didn't recognize her, called the police, turned into this big ordeal. And then, I think the media labeled it, like napping while black, and called this white woman who called the police racist. And then a lot of people came after this young woman and, called her racist, called her all kinds of names. And I remember I was talking to some of my friends about this and saying, like, should she be defended? Would you defend her? What's the right thing to do in this situation? Because, like, based on my reading of the situation, it wasn't so straightforward that she was racist. It was a little more complicated than that. But a friend of mine said something interesting. He said, if another person had that happen to them, that young woman would have joined the mob against her. So she doesn't deserve any protection or defense because she would have done the exact same thing. And I wasn't sure what to say to that. It sort of messed with my moral intuitions a little bit personally. On one hand, I think the sort of mob outrage, social shaming is wrong. But on the other hand, I think it's an interesting argument that if someone would have partaken in that, do they themselves deserve protection or someone to stand up for them? So anyway, yeah, just a thought that I had about that.
Interesting. And I think, I don't know, that makes me think of before you look at the speck in someone else's eye, look at the plank in your own. And this mindset of clean up your own room before you go and judge someone else's room, I think we all could take like 10 notes on that idea.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, that kind of leads into our next question. So, Rob, I'll ask you first. We're talking about judgment and judging whether an action is morally wrong. And how do our social connections influence that judgment? And you spoke about it a little bit, but maybe dive into it a little bit deeper.
Yeah. I mean, so, people, maybe this is a little, but people judge an action as wrong when they feel like a moral norm has been violated, which seems, just sort of a restatement. It's just obvious. But I mean, morality as some psychologists define it as like this interlocking set of norms and practices and values and so on that work together to suppress our self-interest and to promote cooperation. But different social groups have different ideas about what that entails. And this is because we don't tend to arrive at our moral beliefs on our own through, the sort of silent and quiet deliberation. We don't just go into a quiet area and think like, well, what's the right thing? Very few of us do that. We just, we tend to absorb our moral beliefs from the people around us. And at least, according to some of the psychology research, there are sort of two pathways to this. So first, we just tend to absorb the beliefs of our peers, the people who are nearest to us that we spend the most time around. And we also tend to absorb the beliefs of a person who we view as particularly high status or prestigious or sort of a leader figure that we respect a lot. So essentially, we are susceptible to changing or updating our moral beliefs based on our social environments. If we had been born into a vastly different culture, then it's likely that, we would have different moral beliefs. If we'd been born 200 years ago or 200 years from now, we'd likely hold some different moral values than we do right now. So our social environment matters a lot for these kinds of things, for moral judgment.
Excellent. What about you, Dillon?
Yeah. I was going to say also two things. I was going to say kind of where you grow up probably has quite a bit of an impact in those formative years as you're being formed. I think like we all, I'm guessing on this call, we all were raised in the West of like being a good person is a value of like, in America, that's been an overarching theme. That's been a thing is like, oh, I just want to die being a good person. And that's like a belief that we've had. And like, that's kind of a cultural thing that got baked into us growing up. And so growing up, I think that's one thing. I grew up in a small town, conservative, very much like the town is 97% white community. So I am formed by that growing up. And I think that will always have some kind of a hold on me. Now, my ideas have gone beyond that. Yes, went to college. I changed my belief systems on things. I've learned, I've grown, I've listened to new voices. So growing up, that had an impact. And then I same exact thing that he just said, the social circles you surround yourself with. But I'm concerned that those social circles are getting hijacked by voices. And the problem is that you can hear voices everywhere. They're online, they're on YouTube. They're like, you can go and binge 30 hours of Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson or Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. And whichever one you go and listen to 30 hours of with an open mind, you're going to come out thinking there's just something that happens in that. So I'm not a scientist on it, but I am observing that. And it's pretty concerning because we'll talk about this later more so, but like these online devices, they're making a habit of doing that because it gets you on the internet longer, and then ads get more clicks and ads get more views and companies get more money. And, they're all milking us for all of our cash is essentially the goal of some of these online technologies. And as we do that, they're just wanting to keep us online longer. So yes, social circles, but I think social circles are getting not replaced, but like some of that influence is going to online social circles as well and online voices. So it's a little concerning.
I love the whole conversation about how we define what's right and what's wrong, because when I think now about voices that I listened to 20 or 25 years ago, some of those same voices that were so strident about what they believed at the time have completely rejected the entire worldview they held, not just what they said about one specific thing, but they've obliterated all of it and have run as hard as they could in the opposite direction. And I think, I listened to you, right? I made choices based on what you said. Yeah, that's okay. So does social media actually provide a hothouse for outrage to flourish in? Or does it just seem that way? What do you think, Dillon?
Definitely Twitter does. I think they all do, but Twitter is the worst example. I think that I can find. I guess I haven't spent any time on Foursquare or some of those more niche ones, or I haven't spent a lot of time on Reddit either. But I guess those might be more toxic. But of the mainstream three, Twitter is by far the ugliest in my mind. I think that's where I see the most outrage going on. But I think it's because of the echo chambers that they create. Because when they want to keep you online, there's actually a quote here that I've got from Tristan Harris that I'd love to read. But it's a quote on why like technology's goal of capturing human attention for the sake of advertising is so dangerous. And it's the thing that's best at capturing a human being's attention is going to be to show them an individual reality that confirms their worldview. So if I am, which I am, if I'm pro-gun and I see an advertisement for somebody being pro-gun, I'm going to, engage with that more, not less. So YouTube can go and show me a bunch of pro-gun ads or whatever, and that will keep my attention for longer rather than, showing me an extremely anti-gun view and then, I'll click away or look away, whatever. So those echo chambers, they also get built by the people we follow and the channels we subscribe to, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And we get deeper and deeper down that rabbit hole. So that's one way that I can see it happening. I'm interested in Rob's research on this, actually.
Yeah. I just wanted to very quickly jump back for a second on what Holland said earlier about how, some of these public figures will, they'll have an opinion about something, But then, not too long after, they'll suddenly completely reverse their position and argue just as vigorously for the opposite or just something completely different. I mean, I read this book a few months ago, The True Believer by Eric Hoffer, and it was about mass movements in particular. And he was just sort of like a philosopher and a thinker, but he, wrote this very short book about how people get swept away in mass movements. And he said he'd observed that, in places like Nazi Germany, a lot of those people were former communists. And he there was a quote in there, something like, it was often a coin flip whether a German youth would go toward the Nazis or toward the communists. And his main point was that some people just have this sort of extreme personality, and they are just drawn to ideology, and they will run with whatever ideology happens to be available to them. And it doesn't even necessarily matter what the specific tenets of it are. And I think sometimes we see this, especially among younger people, how they do get sort of swept away in fads. Young people do tend to be sort of the most emotional, the most passionate in the moment. And, also it reminded me of a study on Twitter users. I think this was from Pew, which found that 80% of the content that we see on Twitter is produced by just 10% of the users. So really, like, all of Twitter is essentially like 1,000 people, right? Like, it's this like small number of people producing the vast majority of what we see online, at least on Twitter. And I've actually heard that this is true in places like Reddit and other platforms as well, that there's just like a small group of weirdos who love posting content. I'm one of these weirdos. I post content all day on Twitter. And, the rest of us, I think, can get a mistaken view of reality when we see all this stuff and we think that that's what people think. But no, it's just this small group of weirdos who think this, but that's not everyone. So as far as whether social media is this sort of hothouse for outrage, I think it is for a few reasons, but I'll just focus on the sort of, the social psychology, the social incentive side. There was some research from this guy, William Brady, and I think he's worked with Molly Crockett as well. But he basically found that certain kinds of words are more likely to go viral. And he called them moral emotional words. And these are words like attack, blame, bad, fight, hate. And so these kinds of words, these are the words that sort of attract attention. And so Brady and his colleagues developed this interesting theory. Basically, people will post stuff online. Some of it gets ignored. Most of it gets ignored, but some of it gets a lot of attention, and people tend to like getting attention and likes and retweets and followers and so on. And so people learn without even consciously planning it. They just sort of learn through trial and error. Oh, these are the things that get attention and these are the things that don't. And furthermore, the kinds of posts that express outrage get all these likes and get all this attention. Those are the posts that the rest of us see because we tend to pay attention more to popular posts.
Whether they're true or not. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so then we learn, well, that's how you get likes. So if I want to get likes, I better act like that too. And so even though none of the actors here are like intentionally trying to stir up anything, we're all just sort of responding to the social incentives online. Now, there are some people who I think are sort of bad actors, but I think most of the people who are, expressing outrage online are just getting swept away in the platform, not really having any, sinister motives.
Yeah. Especially the overwhelming majority of the likers, especially, or the commenters, Yeah.
It's interesting to hear about the 80-20 rule. That 80-20 rule, 80-10 rule, that just follows suit with just about everything in human nature.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah. We're seeing that anecdotally as well. The hate generating more clicks than love. We as a company, we try to write overwhelmingly positive blog posts. And, we've got a blog that all of our content gets accessed about 1.5 million times a month, which is small potatoes compared to many organizations. But it's a big enough thing where we can do a bit of a case study on it. And if we run the same blog post with two different headlines, one positive and one negative, the negative one will 5x, 10x the results of the original one. So it's social shares, clicks from the email, all that kind of stuff. So we've actually made it a company mantra for a couple of years now: negative headline, positive article. And that's what we write.
Just talking about that with somebody I was helping create a book, because he had created a positive headline and a negative article.
Yeah.
And I put in my comments what I've seen your company put out about that, Dillon. I said, go read, and I found the article that you guys published about how you create negative headlines and positive content. And I included that link in my comments on his piece. And I said, can you rewrite this with, it was a book, so it was just the heading over, it was a chapter heading or a subheading or something. But I said, your subheading needs to grab people's attention with that negativity, but you can't keep doing that to your reader, or by the time they finish the chapter and later the book, they're going to be so depressed they won't want to go out and do what it is you're trying to encourage them to do. You have to start building them back up again.
Well, it's a good plug. I mean, obviously, Holland, it goes right along with some of the things that we've also talked about before about groupthink and confirmation bias. And regardless of, what is actually true out there, our episode on propaganda, Chris Worthy talked about the study where it didn't take very long for something that wasn't quite true to get retweeted and retwisted down a rabbit hole. So, yeah, interesting. All right. So, Rob, you did a great job with putting yourself into a baseball card. Now I want you to succinctly summarize what is an essential element that we need to understand about moral outrage and the narratives of social media.
Okay. Well, I don't know about the one essential thing that everyone should know, but I have been thinking about something that's often overlooked with moral outrage, and how we see moral outrage expressed online. Sam Harris, who runs a popular podcast, he recently wrote an article with Paul Bloom, who's a psychologist. He's the professor whose lab I work in at Yale. So they wrote this essay in the New York Times about moral outrage, and they applied this idea from a philosopher called Derek Parfit and tried to use this as a way to explain moral outrage online. And so the idea was called the harmless torturer. And so, imagine that you're given a very small device with a button on it. And if you press this button, it will send a very tiny electric shock to a single individual. And it's so small, they won't even feel it. It's barely noticeable. Now imagine that 1,000 people have a device like this, and they can all press this button and send these tiny electric shocks to this one single individual. Well, now this person can actually experience a lot of pain if each one of these people presses this button. And so, individually, none of these people are doing much, but collectively, they are causing this one person a lot of pain. And so Harris and Bloom compare moral outrage dogpiling online to this harmless torture idea. If someone makes a mistake or posts a dumb tweet online or something like that, a Justine Sacco kind of situation, and then I post a little insult to her, maybe I didn't do much. But if 1,000 people are posting insults at her, and then each one of these posts are getting thousands of likes and retweets, and so on and so forth, I think individually, each one of us would say well, what's the big deal? I called her an idiot. Okay, so what? But if you're imagining 10,000 people all at the same time calling you an idiot, telling you how horrible you are, liking all of those insults at you, then I think a lot of us would say that the sort of outcome, the outrage is not necessarily proportional to the original transgression.
Wow, that is powerful, this whole idea of harmless torture, because when you think about it and you put it in that way, it's not harmless at all.
Yeah.
Death by 1,000 cuts. Wow. All right, Dillon, what's an essential element we need to think about?
Yeah, I always think of things in financial reasons. The more angry they make you, the more money they make off you. Just something I always remind myself of, and other people whenever I can.
Okay, good to think about.
I like that. Okay, we're going to put a pin in the conversation for right now. Thanks to Rob and Dillon for being part of this important conversation on social media and moral outrage narratives. While you wait for part 2, please go to theafterwordpodcast.com and become a subscriber. You can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, tell your friends about us, and as always, you are welcome at our table.